Yeah, cool.
Excuse me, mate.
Quiet
On
on
your
set.
podcast here. Would you make yourself useful and get out?
Make like a tree and get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
The words of fear.
Welcome everyone back to the Chip Lunch podcast here at the Third Space Studio at Soravival Kirrawee, and it's another episode, and I am joined by regular co-host Braden. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Joel?
I'm excellent, and nice jacket.
Oh, thank you.
That looks like an expensive jacket.
No, not
No,
particularly.
it was a present. Do you want to introduce our guests for us today?
Oh, it is the great and honourable Paul Tate.
Goodness me, great and honourable.
I don't know about either of those two adjectives, great or honourable.
I know, I'd put you.
The meagre dishonourable.
I feel like you could almost be like a judge. I reckon if you put the wig on, I reckon you'd actually pass really well as a judge.
Big wig, braid it
Yeah.
into a little sewing bag or something.
Oh,
That's
is that
a-
what they do?
Oh, if you're talking about the wig, like a.
Like a judge, yeah.
Also, I had no idea
So,
what you're
I'm
talking
in the zone of the Bible.
Oh, sorry.
Judges
Yeah, because
okay.
we're doing
a
a
talk
series
on,
on that.
and we were about to do a talk on Samson.
Yeah,
And you talked about a wig, and I'm thinking he had his big long hair, and at one point his hair gets woven into a sewing basket.
All right. See,
So-
it shows that we haven't read Judges up to that point in Judges yet.
And so I
forward
totally
to it.
missed the idea that I was just a normal judge with a wig.
Judge in court. Yes,
Yes,
that's
a judge.
that's what I was thinking. Yeah, you and a gavel.
Yeah.
You and a wig and a gavel. That'd be pretty awesome. Well, we introduce you by name, but you're also one of the pastors here at Soravival Church.
Yeah. Great privilege.
Congratulations. You've been awarded. Paul, it's awesome to have you on, but we have one question we ask every single person that comes on this podcast, which is, I always like to give that to you, Braden. Do you want to ask it?
How do you take your chips, Paul?
Well, hot chips
Yeah.
with good like salt. Can be chicken salt or normal salt. I don't know.
Oh, okay, because there's this
On the
thing on
fence.
Chip Lunch that,
Chicken or normal.
yeah, and I'm very much on the plain salt side. Braden and the other heathens.
And
are on-
everyone else.
No, that's not true. I started to catch up, and then we've had a few podcasts where I was like, chicken salt, chicken salt, chicken
I
salt.
must admit, I mean, as a kid growing up, the chicken salt wasn't a thing. It was just the plain salt. I don't know if it's been
You were brought up.
a newly developed chemical that they come across.
think you
Most likely.
Yeah, I think you were brought up proper. That's
Yeah. But although the thing that I do like as well is like if you're going to do a bit of a squirt of tomato sauce, I don't mind that either.
yeah. I'm with you. I think we'd enjoy our chip date.
That's right. Yeah.
There are a lot of people. It's seasoning, right? That's what we've said about
Yeah.
chicken salt. It's
Yeah.
seasoning.
Yeah.
Apparently, seasoning,
Right.
and it was made for the Poms that came over to make it more like home or something
Yeah.
like that. Was that right, or was it?
No.
They took it back
They
over
took
to
it back
England.
over there. It's an Australian thing. I'm interested. You clarified hot chips, so now I'm
Oh.
interested in probing further. If like, as the English would say, crisps. If you were going for like chips, a bag of chips at Coles, what would be your choice? Like, do you have a default?
He's like, first of all, it wouldn't be Coles.
Yeah, I mean,
Brought to
I
you
think
by
if
Coles.
I went for a bag of chips, I mean, as a kid growing up, I was always partial to salt and vinegar.
Yeah.
Same.
Now it's just too many varieties. I mean, cracked pepper and
lime.
lime and caramelized onion.
It doesn't taste like caramelized onion at all.
And I think it's how clever the chemists are getting, making more and more
Yeah.
artificial flavors.
exactly.
But as a kid growing up, what was the choice? I mean, plain chips, chicken chips, salt and vinegar.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe barbecue. I remember as a kid liking those ones, barbecue flavors.
Ah, okay.
They came out as well.
Well, here's the problem. Maybe this is why I don't like chicken salt, though. It's because chicken chips don't taste anything like chicken.
Yeah.
So maybe I made an association with that. And I'm like, well, that doesn't taste like chicken either. Why is it called chicken salt? Yes, it just doesn't make sense to me. In my young mind, my young unseasoned mind, when you just had salt is from the earth, salt is from the ground, salt is
So
from...
it's chicken salt, bro.
It's not, because you've added something
You've
to
added
it.
chicken stock and then evaporated it. And It's just chicken stock and
Gosh,
salt,
I
basically.
mean, the labour involved in just making that in the first place is ridiculous. Anyway, back on track. Back to you, Paul. The second question that we always ask on the podcast is, how did you become a Christian?
Yeah, well, I had the privilege of being brought up in a church-going family. I sort of say church-going family because I'm not sure where my parents were at in regards to their own faith, but we were definitely regular at going to church. And so over time I heard the Bible taught, and I went through Sunday school, and that's so I got pretty much understood the gospel. Throughout my life, there's been no one moment that sort of like I'd say is the clincher that it was like where I was like, oh, I was blind, now I see. I think there's a couple of key moments, and they were this. I mean, of course, just going to church regularly was helpful, but then I grew up in an Anglican church, and so there comes a time when in every Anglican boy's life, so to speak, where you're supposed to go to confirmation. Yeah. Confirmation being you take on the vows that your godparents made for you when you're christened. And that's the pattern, at least in the Anglican tradition.
Yeah.
And so I remember sitting down for my first meeting with the minister, and he said to me, Paul, why are you here? And I thought the thing that first came into my mind was because Mum said I had to do it. Now, I didn't say it out loud.
Yeah,
so I didn't say that out loud, and I thought that's not the right answer. And so I still remember it. It's very vivid in my mind. And it was like that moment I had to say like why I wanted to be confirmed. And so it was like it was like one of the first little pennies that started to drop. This is not a pedigree thing. This is a personal relationship between me and God, not because I had a Christian pedigree or a church-going pedigree. So that was a key moment. Over the years, then I probably still had 4 years of high school to go, senior high to go. And when I was at high school, I didn't act very Christianly at all. And so it was after high school, I worked for a couple of years, and that's when I sort of was able to get out of maybe an unhelpful influence environment to reflect upon myself and help. And I kept going to youth group and to church and that sort of thing. But I was able to start helping out with Christian camps and stuff in my holidays, went on beach mission, that sort of thing. So I started being able to share what I believed to be true with others. So again, that's another key block in the foundation in my faith.
Yeah.
And then going on into university, when I was there, I actually also probably learnt for the first time how to clearly explain my faith. So to start learning a gospel outline and be able to share that with others. Again, it was a fairly significant block in the foundation. So, it was maybe I was a bit thick. It took a number of years. It was a process of growing knowledge and maturity, perhaps.
Yeah.
And then by the time I was at university, I was a lot more convinced that it was true.
Yeah.
And I could see changed lives around me and how my life had changed as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
What high school did you go to?
That's what I was going to ask.
Oh, it's just on it.
Actually, I was going to ask where you grew up first and then what high school
okay,
you went to.
well, I grew up in the northwest of Sydney. So cool. I'm probably an outlier in regards to chip lunch.
Yeah.
Panelists so far.
No, we've ranged far and wide. I think, I don't know.
We'll just say it.
Well, if you say it, it's true.
Is northwest Sydney, so Kellyville.
Okay.
And when I grew up in Kellyville, it was still very much a very small suburb and mostly paddocks, market gardens, rebel egg farmers. And
rebel egg farmers.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, that was one of the things that got us on the news once, Kellyville, where these are some sort of dispute between egg farmers and shops and I don't know what else. Okay. And they did these rebel egg farmers, which blocked roads and all that sort of
Gosh.
Jeez.
So-
the
The
egg
truck
farmers
drivers.
again.
yeah. So it was a bit of a that's all that was there. I mean, now it's just a sea of suburbia, and the high school I went to, because Kellyville didn't have a high school at that time. Now there's 2 or 3 in the region where I lived, but I went to a school called Crestwood High School, which was in Borkham Hills,
Okay.
Okay.
because the other feeder high schools were getting overcrowded, and I was a brand new school,
Oh,
and I
wow.
was a pioneer student.
Wait, it was the
Ooh.
first ever year.
Right through high school, we had no one on top of us.
Oh, that's interesting,
Wow.
isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah. So the good side was we didn't have that absolute fear of
Yeah.
going from primary school to high school, and all the fearful words
all
of
the
being
older kids gonna
picked
do
on
to
by
you,
the older
yeah.
kids. But then coming to the senior years, it really was a disadvantage, because what sort of subjects do you do for the HSC, and are they good? You get the teacher's word for it. I'm not sure I'll really take the teacher's word for it.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear like another student. So we missed out on that. But it was, I remember getting this little plaque, pioneer student. It's now a well-established high school, and
Yeah.
lots and lots of years have gone through since then. In fact, I think I drove past it one day. It's off the beaten track, even going out to my old parents' place. But drove past it, and it just looked very dated, even though it was brand new in the 1980s. It now looks quite old.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What a story. That's,
Yeah,
that's so funny, because you would have started year 7. There would have only been 1 year there, right?
that's right. We were the only year.
And then you go to year 8, and then there's only a year 7.
And we're in a paddock with demountable classrooms. The
Oh.
whole school was demountables.
Oh, wow.
So we just stayed in. There was a demountable hall. There was a demountable library, demountable science labs,
Yeah.
demountable
Wow.
woodworking rooms, as well as normal classrooms. And it just kept spreading and spreading. And I remember as a kid thinking, this is just going to keep growing forever. And like, are they ever going to build the real one? And we didn't get into the real buildings until year 11,
Okay.
year 11 and 12.
Does that
Basically.
mean like there was only enough teachers for like 1 year in the first year, and then all of a sudden second year they had to have twice the amount of teachers? or
Yeah,
whatever?
I think the
Wow.
the teacher faculty just grew year on in year out.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, so, and we were supposed to be very progressive. There was no school uniform,
Oh.
and things like that.
Is
Yeah,
this a public school?
it was a public school, a state school.
No school uniform.
It was, and I mean, it was a bit frustrating. I remember my parents and lots of other parents were really annoyed, thinking, oh, great, now I've got like, rather than just having a set clothing,
Yeah.
it was like, oh, what dress are they going to wear today, or what T-shirt are you going to wear today? And
Yeah.
so eventually they had a standard form of dress, which was essentially like a uniform. And I think eventually it did default into becoming a uniform school.
Yeah.
I remember when I was at primary school, and I'd be just like, yeah, we should be like America. We should wear whatever we want. And then interesting that my wife is a teacher, and to hear her perspective on a uniform, it's actually quite one of the reasons that uniforms have been brought in, were brought in at a certain time, was to act as a leveler. Like, because education should be for all, and then so that means that everyone should be the same regardless of what they're wearing. I thought that was actually it was educational for me. So,
Yeah, and it was certainly one of the arguments that the parents that were very pro-uniform came out, wheeled that one out as well. Like, and I mean, and it did become burdensome. I think with time, people sort of got fairly relaxed about it once we got used to it. But I look back sometimes, I think every so often I stumble across an old school photo, and we just look like such a bunch of drongos compared to my kids that like are in schools with shirts and ties and sometimes even blazers on, and they just look like little businessmen and women, and we just look like such a bunch of drongos.
Drongo, what a
with
word.
these really bad 80s haircuts.
Yeah. What were you rocking then?
Probably a bit of a mullet.
Oh, yes. It's come back now, right?
Yeah.
Are you going to try and
Bring it back.
Come back with mullet.
get on the craze
I
again?
don't think Linda or my wife would let me do
I
that.
tell you what, you look good up the front of church. Having
The mullet. Nathan, my third child, he's got a pretty ugly mullet at the moment.
Put the ugly in the front of it.
No, because
not a good one.
He actually went to get his haircut the other day,
Yeah.
and with a Russian hairdresser, and he came out and she just made it even more intensely mullet. And even he was a bit embarrassed about
Oh,
it. So
really?
he's going to have to go to another hairdresser to get it trimmed up before his formal. He's just
that
finished
makes sense.
HSC.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
So even he came in and I didn't see it because he had a cap on the other day, but he came in and he showed me the embarrassment. I said, "Couldn't you tell her to stop?" He goes, "Oh, she did one side and then I couldn't tell her not to do the other side."
There's you can't have uneven sides, can you?
Yeah.
So what was it like being a Christian at the demountable non-school uniform school?
Like I said, I didn't really carry my faith much around with me at school. We did have scripture still at school, and so I by default sort of went to that as the Protestant scripture option, and we still had, I think, weekly scripture. I think at one stage it did get wheeled back to just like a once a month type of extravaganza. They'd fill up the whole library full of the kids, and they'd do a bit more of a show.
Oh, okay.
We're talking about like a story being told with an overhead projector, like slides that people do.
Wow.
So it was hardly high tech. As a Christian, I think I was living sort of two lives. I was there at church on a weekend, youth group, but at school amongst my non-Christian mates. Just following along with them. There was a time where I realised, especially around the confirmation time, I realised I've got to clean up my language. So language was very easy to be who's the toughest guy and who can say the silliest things.
Yeah.
And so I was able to drop that, which was a good change. But like I said, it was after school where I was able to actually just stabilise and I've met a few of my friends from school since then, some of which have become Christians.
Oh,
yeah.
That's cool.
So I met one at a conference, Christian conference, who just walked up. I couldn't recognise him at first, and then,
you're like, "Where's your mullet?"
Yeah, that's right. And then they just it was an amazing story of how they became Christians after high school, and
wow.
Yeah.
So not much crossover between the people you were going to church or youth group with and your school friends?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So again, my school wasn't really that geographically close to where I was living because we were Kelly was sort of the next suburb out of Balcombe Hills. We'd have to sort of commute back to the school. The local churches for that high school were probably in the Balcombe Hills area.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have that crossover as they might now, because now I know that the church is there, and a number of high schools, they've got chaplains there, and high school chaplains that are connected with the church, and so there'd be a much tighter connection because of the geographical proximity.
Yeah, right. You mentioned that you weren't sure of your parents' faith. Do you think that played a part in you perhaps not living as much as a Christian as you might have liked to at school? So for example, I think
I don't know if I think my parents were living reasonably consistent.
Yeah.
Probably my mum more so than my dad. But I think a lot of my upbringing was probably with a moral understanding of Christian faith.
Yeah.
So there's certain things I would have not dared to have done. So by grace of God, I didn't stumble and fall in a big way during high school, because I had this sort of moral obligation in some ways, or to really not want to disappoint my parents, that sort of thing.
Probably a lot of Australians
Yeah,
are like that, because obviously the church was such an influential part of life back
yeah, that's right.
in their time.
Yeah, certainly in my parents' time,
Mm.
would have been much stronger. But by the 80s, it's starting to really, fade away.
Yep.
But I think we weren't just totally nominal. I think we were fairly involved. My parents had been involved. Certainly, like my mum, now since then is like she now teaches school scripture and things like that. She's very keen.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And my dad's actually, I think, got a much clearer understanding these days too. In fact, only a couple of weeks ago, I baptised him.
Really?
Yeah, we did a public baptism up at their retirement village.
How good is that?
Yeah. So I think he's talking to his minister as well, like thinking that he's actually much clearer on his faith. So
That's beautiful.
yeah. So they've grown in their faith over the years, and I'm thankful for the influence they've had on me. But it probably, you're right. I think it did have that I therefore didn't act probably as consistently as I could have.
How was that experience baptizing your dad? This is obviously a fresh one, but
Yeah. It was initially when he talked to me about it, I was thinking, I hope you're not just again going down this legalistic thing. So I was talking to him a lot about this really is not going to make any difference in your standing before God. And so I think it took a while to talk that through. He had spoken to the church that they'd gone to, but then through COVID meant they were a bit distant, so he wasn't able to follow that through. So I was really pushing him hard to sort of say, get the minister from your church to do this, because I wanted a bit more objectivity for him. But again, the COVID thing was having us really in a lot of limitations for them getting a bit of church. So I was able to send him lots of material, which he was able to read and reflect upon. I think it was a lovely day. I was a bit reluctant initially. I really think I did want a third party outside of the family.
yeah,
But yeah, when we eventually got around to doing it, it was a lovely day, and we had about 30 people there to witness it, and it was just it was lovely. Yeah.
How cool.
Mm.
Pretty cool experience. Well, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but it must be a pretty cool experience to be able to baptise your dad as well. Like, it was a proud moment?
Yeah, I guess I think my dad's probably prouder, like in that sense, like, and for me, I think it was more of a happy moment, and almost in some ways a bit more of a relief moment, because the minister from church came, their church came, and I was able to have a lengthy chat with him, and after that, I was thinking, there was a lot of concerns allayed, because he was able to say, you know what, your dad has been coming to Bible study regularly, even like on the Zoom period, and I really do believe it over the last few years he's actually really come to understand the gospel more fully. So, and I mean, he's getting more elderly, and I think the pressure of work and putting work behind him has helped him to sort of like reflect more, which has been good.
What was his job?
He's been a self-made sort of businessman type of guy. He was a wholesaler of retail packaging, disposable packaging products, that sort of stuff, paper bags, cups, toilet paper, all that sort of stuff. He inherited half of his uncle's business, and then just ran that for as long as I know, like 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yep. Yeah.
So we take it back to you, there was, you said the high school probably weren't living as a Christian very much, but it sounded like university was a real turning point for you as well. Why was that? Like, what did you go to study at university, and then why was becoming a Christian, or perhaps behaving in a way that God would have preferred?
Yeah.
Why was that important then?
Oh, well, I mean, I think I went, after high school, I really didn't know what to do. I had enrolled in a science degree. I had no idea why. to do that. I remember going to the university and getting the worst possible timetable because I had no idea what I was doing.
Oh, right.
And so by the time I finally worked it out, all the tutorials that were left were first thing Monday morning and last thing Friday afternoon.
Oh, no.
So I was like, I had no idea. Anyway, I did some work experience with a neighbour who had a plant nursery, and he said, "Hey, if you want, come and work with me next week." And I thought, "Oh, great! I needed a bit of job over the summer, so started working with him." And then he helped me to enrol in a certificate course in horticulture, that sort of thing. And so I did that for a little while, and then he said, "Well, you can now work with me permanently if you like." So I thought, look, I don't know what I want to do. This is some work, a little bit of study on the side. And after finishing that, I went to university to study landscape architecture.
Cool.
Right.
Yeah. So I was at New South Wales University studying landscape architecture, and there was a very established Christian group that I was introduced to a few people and followed up, and that's where I started learning how to express my faith rather than just saying, why you're a Christian, and the answer being, oh, Jesus loves me. I know this. I know because the Bible tells me so. It started to actually deepen my faith, as well as going to regular Bible talks, that sort of stuff, for a number of years, and having ongoing connection with different Christians and seeing Christians at different stages as well. So people who are like students right through to people who are senior students, as well as people who are training for ministry, just started doing that after university, through to senior staff Christian ministry. So the whole spectrum was there to sort of watch, and I just got involved. And their line was, well, you're here at university, you're going to stretch yourself in your secular understanding. It's actually probably pretty wise to keep stretching yourself in your Christian understanding while you're here as well. Not do a double degree, but at least stretch yourself a little bit. And I thought, that stands to reason. And that's what I did. And it was great. It was really, really great. It meant that, I didn't end up becoming this know-it-all about certain topics, but know nothing about Christianity. So I grew a lot as a Christian during those university years.
What did you I had a question. What does that look like on like an on-campus ministry? Because I mean, I was a Christian when I went to uni, but I didn't get involved in the Christian university groups, and I think Braden was probably similar.
Yeah, we had a chat about this.
We chatted that previously. I was just wondering, what does that look like are you still having to go on Monday mornings and Friday afternoons, and then trying to find time in between, or what do you do?
I mean, my degree was fairly spread out pretty evenly for 5 days of the week. I mean, I think I was there most days. There was a time when I was there where lunchtime was still lunchtime, and it was actually a bit of a common lunchtime. So while I was at university, pretty much 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock was fairly open as lunchtime. There would have been lectures going on and stuff like that. But like, for example, there's lunchtime concerts all the time, like going on the library lawn. And so there was this atmosphere when I was at university, I'm sure it's changed a bit, but where lunchtime was actually fairly free and open. And so that's when the Bible talks would be on. So we'd just all, like the Christians, we'd traipse up, and with our friends, we'd invite our friends. It was very evangelistic. We'd invite our friends up and we'd sit down, listen to a half-hour talk on the Bible during the lunchtime. We were able to eat our lunch while we were there. But if you weren't doing that, then you might be sitting down on the library lawn watching a band or hanging out with your friends. That was one thing. You could go to the Bible talks, and that meant, and then another day we might have our faculty Bible study. So the other Christians in the architecture faculty would come together for a Bible study, and we'd sit down and study the Bible together. And then if you wanted to go another step, you could do some ministry training, and that would be usually in the afternoons.
Yeah.
that's where I learned how to share the gospel with others, how to follow people up, how to lead a Bible study, all these sort of basic training things that you used to do. They were all offered at the university campus, and then on top of that, you could meet up with other people one-to-one. So I did spend a lot of hours, probably 4 or 5 more hours a week doing Christian things. And I was still involved in my church back home. In fact, taking a lot of the skills from what I was gaining at university and applying them in my youth leading back at my home church and that sort of thing. But eventually I did actually move across because I was living still at Kellyville and commuting to Kensington.
It's a long trip.
It's a long trip. So, about...
That'd be a bus and a train?
I used to drive my car across to a station and then catch the train. But by the time I've done that, and then from the train, bus to the university, it could be an hour and a half to 2 hours just one way. So by the end of the day, it was a long day. So I mean, my third and fourth year at university, I moved into university campus and lived on campus. And as a result of being able to live there, I got even more involved.
Yeah.
So there was a university church that I went to on Friday night of the week, and there was more Bible studies involved with that. And so I had a lot more time.
Wow.
So I was actually, that's what university ministry was like.
Yeah. And
it still is, I think, for a lot of campuses these days.
Yeah, it didn't feel like it was like that on my campus. So that sounds a bit more interesting than...
Which one did you go to?
I went to University of Western Sydney, and I might have also been ignorant because I was like, just turn up for those 3 hours and get out of there. But it was a very different experience to your uni experience. And how are you fitting in working at the same time?
If you've got university work?
Yeah, or are you working a job?
No. So I'd worked before going to university. I was still living at home, saved up most of that money. So I had no pressure during my university days to think I better get a job.
Okay.
And the degree was a bit of a vocational degree, so it was fairly set curriculum, and it was fairly full. So it wasn't like I could just zip in and think I'm here for 3 hours. I can zip out. And somehow I've compressed all my lectures and tutorials into 2 days, and so I can get out the rest of the time. It was like, I've got a set curriculum, a set timetable. I'm hanging around university. I've got the next 2 hours off. I'll wander up to campus Bible study and listen to a talk or catch up with some friends. And so it was a bit more of a full-time teaching, a learning time.
Yeah, right. So if I need some landscaping done, did you enjoy doing landscape architecture?
I did. I really did.
Yeah.
Actually, I did pretty well at it.
First class honours or something.
I did do well.
Pioneer.
So I didn't get the university medal or anything of that extreme, but I did okay, and I really enjoyed it. And my time at university was just wonderful. Yeah. And thanks to the fact that I worked a bit after school, so I arrived a bit later.
Yeah.
So I wasn't so panicked. I looked at a lot of the other students that I was studying with that had come straight from high school, and they were just in a constant state of panic. Like, what are they doing now? When's this due? And how am I going to get this done? That extra couple of years, and the fact that I also had done a little bit of complementary study, just meant I just was relaxed the whole time.
Right.
And I mean, things stepped up. Like you start off with some basic subjects, and by the end you're doing, quite complicated designs, and writing a thesis and that sort of stuff. So, but I really enjoyed it. So that whole experience, and I could have easily gone into that as my profession.
Well, that's the reason I asked, was because I know that you eventually went into full-time ministry.
That's right.
Because you're obviously enjoying ministry at university so much.
Yep.
But then also landscape architecture. So once you're finishing university, what's the decision-making process?
Well, through that time of university, like I said, you've probably gathered so far, I was fairly involved.
Yeah.
I'd moved across and was even more involved. And like I said, there was people at different stages, and so I was actually meeting up with people who were like doing ministry apprenticeships, like actually working in ministry training in preparation for for ministry. But they were only about 2 or 3 years in front of us, and so over time, it came to the point where they offered some people the possibility of ongoing training in ministry. And so they said, if you're interested in that sort of thing, then come and talk to them. And so I think it was my 3rd year.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I've always been keen to be involved in ministry. I was keenly involved in my home church before I got to university. And I'd just learnt so much more, and my convictions had deepened a lot more about it. And so I talked to the various people who offered to help train us to do ministry training. And so I joined what was called the Ministry Training Strategy. It's still around today, MTS.
MTS, yep.
But it sort of started at New South Wales University, so it was very early days. It was running in 1 or 2 churches in Sydney, and I think 1 or 2 of the other campuses, or they had different programs. And so, got involved in that. So because I'd worked a bit before university, they offered for me to come straight on to the program. It was a 2-year training program. And so I did that in the mid-90s. And that's when we got married, Lyndall and I.
Oh, so hang on. How did you meet Lyndall?
She was at university.
Ah, a landscape architect?
No. She was. We met at uni church. So she
probably a good way to meet people, I feel.
Yeah, that's why I grieve. I grieve for a lot of the young Christians who have just missed out on essentially 2 years of university.
Yeah.
Right.
They missed out 2 years opportunity of meeting a Christian peer, a potential Christian partner.
Yeah.
It was she was studying music, but we were both involved in university church. Probably didn't meet each other properly until like over a summer period. Over the summer period, like the numbers went right down because it was like vacation. So at that point, you sort of you meet up with the smaller group, and that's when we met and got to know each other, and we got married. That first year out of university.
Yeah.
So I just started MTS, and that's where we got married and did that for 2 years.
Did you? Can you remember what your first date was?
I think it was actually riding a bike around Centennial Park.
The same bike, like a tandem bike?
Oh,
That would have been very romantic, but it wasn't. It wasn't a tandem bike, but it was riding a couple of laps around Centennial Park.
That's not a bad date.
Yeah,
because you're kind of doing something and you don't have to be like staring at each other the whole time. Get to know each other a bit easier.
A good date for me, yeah. A good bloke date. Go do something.
Yeah, go do something. Then do some fishing afterwards. Or
That's
something.
right, yeah. Go stop around at one of the ponds and see if we can catch some fish.
Cool. So you got married.
Yep.
And was it the end? No, that's when you started the MTS course?
That was when we started MTS. So
okay.
that was and that was a 2-year training apprenticeship. And did that for 2 years, and then I worked for a year. So by that stage, I think our finances had sort of like whittled down.
That was my next question.
Years.
How does that go?
We were paid. There was a basic sort of
stipend.
Stipend, I guess we'd call it that. We were paid a basic wage that paid the rent. We lived pretty meagre sort of
pretty lean.
Yeah, just lean, and lived in an apartment in the eastern suburbs, and so we're near the university. So we worked on the campus again. It was great fun working with a lot of students who I was studying with as well. So they were sort of like the years in front or the years behind. So it was still very, for about 6 years, that was our life, like basically the eastern suburbs and our university, New South Wales, that sort of area. And
So it sounds like you look back on it very fondly.
Oh yeah, it was great. I mean, incredibly formative. Privileged to be under the teaching and training of some pretty influential people. So Philip Jensen, Cole Marshall, our Stewart, Phil Wheeler.
Some heavy hitters in the Anglican Church.
Yeah, those guys were all there at campus and training us all. And I still catch up with Cole and once a month just to chat. Yeah. So it's lovely to have that ongoing relationship, which is really lovely.
A question that I wanted to ask you though is that when were you not in a band?
I was.
When did this happen?
Well, after high school. So basically I was noodling around guitar-wise in the latter years of my high school. And then probably my closest mate, he was a very keen drummer. So he was the drummer. And then I went on a Camp Howard, which was like a Christian...
John Howard.
Sorry. Why? Why?
As soon as you said Howard, I thought of John Howard.
Now that you say John Howard, I'm thinking, oh, it's not John Howard. So who was it? And I'm trying to think, was his name Howard or something Howard?
Howard Hughes.
A bit of a again tradition, Christian camp tradition type of thing, and they ran various things like hikes or things down at Port Hacking here nearby, and so I went on this hike. That was actually led by a minister from Sutherland. Years and years ago. This is again in the late 80s, I think. And I met this guy and we just hit it off and chatted. And he was also a keen guitarist, muso. And one of his good mates was a bass player.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, here we go.
So I was like, we came together and we mucked around just playing heavy metal and all that sort of stuff. So that's what we did. We were just rocking out.
Wow.
And we sort of we did the demo recordings and stuff, like nothing too serious. And it was very hard to get live gigs. So it was hard to get an opportunity to play in front of an audience. And every so often we got a little bit of a run on by being able to get support acts to other big pub gigs. So we did play a couple of the big pub venues in Sydney, thanks to the fact that we used to support a Led Zeppelin cover band. So the Led Zeppelin cover band were the ones going around playing the big venues in Sydney because everyone wanted to hear the Led Zeppelin songs. But we were able to sort of get up beforehand, do half an hour of just whatever we wanted. Yeah. And so that was good fun.
You said heavy metal. What's it sounding like? Do we know? Were you like a particular band? Or influenced by?
I guess we were influenced by Iron Maiden a fair bit. You sort of like harmony guitar lines sort of playing together. These bands are sort of like, some of them are still getting around, but they're definitely the elder statesmen now of rock and roll. I mean, we did some Led Zeppelin songs and Deep Purple songs and stuff like that. But of course, the limitation with doing those sorts of songs is actually having a singer who can pull that off.
Yeah, really good singer.
So it took. Once we had a guy who was a lot older than us, who sounded a bit like Jimmy Barnes.
Yeah.
And so we did a few gigs with him, but we were very much more wanting to play our own music. Yeah. And so that was the pressure. So we did every so often play some of those songs, but you can't. It's very hard to find a singer who can belt out songs like guys from Led Zeppelin and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, just get down.
Child in Time.
Yeah, singing immigrant song.
Like, that's right. Yeah. So, that was probably the late 80s for about 3 or 4 years, and then probably halfway through my uni days, we changed a lot. We'd mellowed a bit more, so a bit more acoustic and a bit more folky.
Like Led Zeppelin.
Like Zeppelin, probably.
Yeah, they did that.
In our old age, we were sort of slowing down, and that's the way our music went. But then one of the guys went overseas to do a teaching stint, and then I started doing ministry, and the only way to sort of again get gigs was to be sort of like on call anytime. Like we've got three nights in a couple of pubs on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. Would you go and do that, like this weekend? It's like, well, no. I'm going to be involved with church and Bible study. I just couldn't just sort of drop everything and go. So fully letting go to the rock and roll dream, I didn't do that. So so
it's tough to do that, right? Like if you're in a band, like you've got to be touring like non-stop, right?
Yeah. And even then, there's no guarantee you're going to get anywhere. And I think in that era of the late 80s, it really was quite hard. It probably is as hard as it is now, in that the live venues actually almost don't exist much anymore.
Yeah.
It might be people are recording albums in their bedrooms that sound better, 100 times better than anything we recorded in a proper studio. The standard has become so much better, but where do you go out and play gigs? So so
got to get discovered on the internet rather than in the pub.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So
did you ever have difficulty being a Christian in that environment?
During that time, we were a Christian band. Like, we were all Christians in the band. Our songs, if you listen to them enough, you would hear the cryptic message of the gospel perhaps in there.
Play it slowly backwards.
Or
masking.
a bit like that. Or if you listen to it, I remember we played a gig at the university, in the university bar at New South Wales, some sort of band comp. We did pretty well because we hadn't just thrown ourselves together like a week beforehand.
Yep.
And I can still remember this guy from one of the colleges who I had a number of conversations with about Christianity. And he was going, the band sounded great. He goes, I couldn't help but notice you were trying to squeeze the gospel in there, and like when you talk about this song and all that sort of stuff, and there was a song about the prodigal and all that sort of stuff, and I was going, the message is there if you want to hear it. So that was sort of testimony. The message was there if you wanted to follow it. But we didn't. Probably by the grace of God, we didn't we didn't become that successful that all the temptations of the rock and roll lifestyle. We were a far cry from ever being in that sort of position.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
What was the band called, by the way?
Well, over the years, the name changed.
Okay.
So
over the years,
as we started, we were called Conquest.
Ooh.
So it was more heavy hard rock.
I'm imagining lots of like angels and that kind of thing. Yeah, very Iron Maiden. Sorry,
very Iron Maiden.
Yep.
Then we called Mirage. So it's getting a little bit more sort of, what are they? Like, are they heavy? Are they soft? So Mirage, and then eventually we became Shadow Factory.
Oh, Shadow Factory.
And so
because you're making shadows.
I think it was just inspired from, again, one of the guys did a tourist trip, and he took a photo of this sculpture, and it was a sculpture of a human body with a hammer, like hammering on some steel or something. And so it looked like he thought it was a shadow, but it looks like he's working in a factory. So
Shadow Factory.
That was it. So Shadow Factory, and that was the three iterations of our band.
And still all the same members, or did you say you had different singers?
No. We at one point we did have in Conquest, in the early days of Conquest, and we had a guy called Con the fruiterer. He truly was. He was a fruiterer.
Was he?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I don't know. Was his name Con, or that was his friend? There was this short Italian fruiterer who was really could belt out. Like, I mean, he was like he could belt out Led Zeppelin songs and stuff like that. So nice. It was quite amazing. One of our guys bumped into him and had conversation with him in the fruit shop. So it was
the fruit shop.
There was a very short time, but then the rest of the time the core was pretty much the same. The same four guys we'd known each other for a long, long time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And what led to the demise of Shadow Factory?
Well, probably my choice is to go into ministry.
Oh.
Not long after that, the guy, like, as much as he says, "Oh, my choice to go into ministry brought the band to an end," within weeks after that, he'd gone on to a long-term teaching position in Germany or something in some international school. So I was
So
going,
they
well,
were
you
trying to
were
make you
you
out
were
like
hardly,
you're okay.
you know, in the country for much longer than I was. I mean, he had left to go overseas well before I was anywhere near moving overseas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking of moving overseas,
Yes.
so kind of, I'll skip over Moore College generally because I'm assuming that's what came after MTS.
Yep, so I did MTS and then worked for a year and then went to Moore College for 4 years.
Which is a theological college.
A theological college, did a degree.
Which you were at Braden as well.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
What were you skipping over though?
That
At
period
college.
to go.
Okay, skipping over the
After
college.
college, you made an interesting decision.
Yeah.
Yes,
Actually,
yes.
would like to hear about this.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
after college, we made a decision to go to do missionary work and to go to Russia, which was not really out. We didn't think that clearly.
Yeah, I was like,
We didn't go, all right, when I was in third or fourth year of
Yeah, it's
college,
like,
let's
okay,
be missionaries and this is
Russia.
where we're going. While we're at college, we were still involved with churches and helping things out. We were actually friends with a number of people who had gone as missionaries overseas
yeah,
and we were supporting them in prayer and finances and that sort of thing, receiving prayer points from them and sharing that with our church. And as we kept doing that sort of thing and praying for them, our hearts are stirring at the same time. Lyndall was a bit more international than what I was. She had studied languages
yeah.
at university alongside some music, and she'd travelled overseas and sort of had visited missionaries. So we were starting to think maybe we could do this sort of thing, and so we started our conversation with a missionary agency, the Church Missionary Society, which those conversations last for a couple of years. When you first go there to say, what does it take to be a missionary? And then over those years, you sort of walk together with that organisation and work out where you might be able to go.
Yeah.
Mm.
So why Russia?
It's a serious decision to go to Russia.
Yeah.
I'd say.
Yeah. Well, one of the missionaries that we were particularly close with and had been supporting them in prayer were missionaries in Slovenia, which is the northernmost tip of the former Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
And we thought that we would actually follow them, that we'd go and join them. And but they had been out for maybe 3 to 4 years before we were ready to go.
Yeah.
And so during that time, someone else had gone with the organisation, and it was a fairly small ministry, so it would start becoming a little bit claustrophobic if we also went there as well.
Yeah.
To be involved in this very, very small pioneering ministry. Even the local churches were tiny, like Bible study groups. And it was that time when CMS was talking to the former USSR had broken up, and there were a number of people who were doing presentations at various missionary conferences, and the Church Missionary Society had decided to get into partnership with a group of people called the Tatar people. Now, the Tatar people are the largest minority group within Russia.
Yeah.
And they were involved with them and wanted to see that potentially do ministry with some people there. They looked firstly for partnerships, for connections, to accept the missionary and support the missionary when you get there. And so that was a part of the world that they were interested in serving. So that's how we sort of, our visions sort of came together. So we weren't thinking clearly, we're definitely going to go to Russia.
Yeah.
We were thinking, well, we're sort of interested in Eastern Europe, and we've been praying for an Eastern European country for many years, and so our heart was warm to that part of the world.
Yeah.
Lyndall had studied Russian at university.
That helps.
That made another connection. And then the organisation that we wanted to go with, because they were very good at supporting and caring for missionaries, were thinking about this particular part of Russia.
Yeah, which was Kazan, didn't you go?
Yeah, Kazan in Tatarstan,
Yeah.
which is part of Russia.
Yeah.
So that's how that's how the things sort of came together. It wasn't like we just woke up and went, we're going to go to this city,
Yeah.
this provincial city in this massive country.
Yeah.
It was like having a heart inclined to that part of the world, having receiving partners, connections, and having a sending body that was partnered with those group. So that's how it worked.
Yeah.
Which didn't make it any more surreal, any less surreal when we arrived.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the day that we arrived, it was just like, how did we get here? Like,
How cold was it the day you arrived? Was it summer or winter?
It was spring.
Okay.
It was early spring. There's still lots of snow and ice on the road
okay.
and that sort of thing. And so it was pretty chilly. But I can still remember, like, of course, when you arrive at the airport and we had a welcoming party, and it was all very exciting. And they drove us to our apartment, and it's like, and so it's all, this is exciting, isn't it? Oh, isn't this interesting? We were in a new place. But when the last person leaves after that moment, and the door shuts, and you look around and go, okay, we're here. And then you go, we are here. Where's here? This is a far, far cry from a kid who grew up, in the bush of northwest Sydney in Kellyville.
Yeah.
With the egg farmers.
With the egg farmers.
The rebel egg farmers.
If you had told me that I was going to be at Kazan, in 20 years' time after that, I'd be going, what? That's just outrageous.
Yeah.
So it was an amazing work of God that we actually got there, and then supported by people there.
Yeah.
And then to see things happen, which was even more exciting.
Yeah, that's super exciting.
Yeah.
What was your, did you have a set goal when you got there? What was your role?
Well, we've spoken pretty clearly about where and when and all that sort of stuff, but actually we weren't there as card-carrying missionaries. You actually can't do that sort of thing.
Left the card at home.
Not that we were actually spies or anything, but there was. There's a general suspicion towards the outsiders in Russia, not from the people in general, but certainly from the leadership.
Yeah.
I think that actually comes out of the Orthodox Church. I mean, that's actually another probably discussion for another day about how, if your society's been based for a long, long time on Orthodox Christianity, and it's called Orthodox, that is the right way. That means that every other person's way of Christianity must be wrong.
The wrong way.
Yeah.
And so there's this view from the church that outsiders are heretical. And then not only that, you've then got two generations of communist approach, which is sort of locked out, but changed themselves. And so there's an air of suspicion. Again, not with the people on the street. They're mostly really quite lovely people when you get to know them. But yeah, it takes a while to connect.
Yeah.
So when we first got there, it was learning language.
Yeah.
So I had only a couple of words. So I could say hello, goodbye, thank you.
3 good ones.
That's
at
right.
least.
They talk about in language learning circles. They talk about your power tools.
Where's the bathroom? I feel like that's the first one.
That would be one, yeah. And I don't understand. Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Things like this. So basically, learning the language. So we were there as students. So I was there on a student visa.
Yeah.
Enrolled in the university and started doing, both Lyndall and I, doing Russian language.
Yeah.
And did that for 3 years. And then I came back in the following 3 years and taught some English. So
cool.
The university I was studying at, actually I was able to get a job there part-time as a sort of part of the English teaching faculty. My role was to simply work on fluency and that sort of stuff. So they knew grammar way better than I did.
Yeah.
I grew up learning English just by speaking it. But of course I was way more fluent than the grammar expert.
Yeah.
So that was my role then. So I was a teacher then for another 3 years.
Cool.
And alongside of that, we were free to go to church. but maybe not so free to be very heavily involved in church. So I could go to church and every so often you'd hear people asking lots of questions about who we were and what we were doing. But really, I was fulfilling my visa requirements, and alongside of that, we worked with the local Christians and Christian leadership to encourage them as best we could. Yeah.
What's your enduring memory of being in Russia?
Probably it was, like I said, the people were lovely. We've got some dear friends there, and the times, the meals, the fellowship spent with them was really lovely. Sure, there was other elements of like cold. So
It's so cold.
it is frozen for 6 months of the year.
Yeah.
So basically, as we get, if you think about, we're hot for like 6 months of the year. You know, like summer's a bit cold this year, but usually by this stage we're pretty hot, and summer keeps going right through into the next year, and by Easter time it starts to cool off. Well, just turn that on its head, and basically the cold is the opposite. So it gets cold in October and doesn't warm up until April, May.
Oh my gosh. What's like the minus temperature in winter like?
I mean, it can get pretty cold, but the coldest I probably ever found myself having stuck on the street and having to walk a fairly long distance home somewhere.
Yeah.
It's about minus 30. And it hurts. It hurts at that point.
Yeah.
Breathing hurts.
Wow.
You're everything freezes. Like
all the snot that's coming out of your nose?
All the nasal hairs freeze, and it's a bit crunchy. So like a crunch.
Oh man!
So
like your hair? Does your hair get anything frozen?
well, if it's moist, it would like
Right.
if you don't, people don't do this, but I mean, like if you went out and you just wash your hair, you don't walk out with wet hair, because it will. I mean, if it was really cold, because usually you'd have a beanie and a hat on. So the thing is, we look at that and we shiver when it's like, 10, 15, 11 degrees or something like that.
Yeah.
It's because we're just not prepared for the cold.
Yeah.
Just like they're not prepared for the heat. It gets to about 25 and they're going, oh, do you know, this is like a heat wave. We're all going to melt. And it's like, this is nothing. Like, this is nothing. So that's the same. They dress very, very well. So you have good gloves, good jackets, good shoes, and everything can be really, really warm. And heat inside is really well heated and insulated. And it's amazing how much everything works still. Even when it's frozen. You think the car's out there under a pile of snow, surely it's not going to start. And they start, because if you've got antifreeze in your windscreen wipers and the radiator, the oil's fine, petrol won't freeze. And so away it goes. The cars start and you drive around on these ice rinks.
Yeah.
with little, snow tyres.
Like the studded tyres.
Studded tyres.
Jeez.
Yeah, right.
And that's what keeps you on the road.
Yeah.
And otherwise, everything's still going. You pull up and you can go to the shop and it's all done.
How did you find living, obviously being on mission, but not really being a missionary, like in terms of card carrying, like open out? How did you find that affect your relationship with God and the people around you?
There was probably most of the time we could be open with people. It's almost like every moment of every day you're sort of thinking, I'm here because I'm here to tell people the gospel. Like I'm here to be an ambassador for Christ.
Yeah.
So you sort of, in some ways, it does strengthen your convictions. Like you just think, well, this is what I'm doing. I mean, when time's tough, when it is, not every day you're sharing the gospel. Some days you're just surviving just to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
The kids are bouncing off the wall because everyone's getting cabin fever, and you're just thinking, what have we done?
Yeah.
So it's not perfect. You're not sort of living this lovely, isn't this wonderful? But it does really focus your thinking, because it was so foreign, such a different place, and a hard place to live.
Yeah.
You think, well, why am I doing this? And so every day I'd often ask myself as I'm sort of like trying to not slip over on the way to the university, and you're trudging through the snow and you're just thinking, well, because I'm here to share the gospel with people and encourage the church and to equip leaders so they can keep sharing the gospel. That's what it's about. So it does really focus your convictions and your thoughts.
And I suppose it makes you make sure you're really on top of your faith and make sure you're really sharp with what you're talking about.
Yeah, I guess so. That would have been good. Like, you don't become a super Christian though. Like, I mean, you still struggle. You might struggle even with doubts, that sort of thing. God's kind though. Alongside of that, sometimes you might think, I haven't been so sharp. I haven't been able to express my faith properly to this person in another language.
Yeah, that's another thing. Just thinking about how you reflected on high school and saying like, oh, I maybe didn't express my faith as well as I could have, and now all of a sudden you've gone through this journey of learning how and walking with God and maybe getting better at that, but now you're talking to someone in a different language, trying to communicate as clearly
as you can, but doing it pretty poorly. Because,
exactly.
I mean, there's times that just really like soul destroying in some ways. Like you're sort of walking back from the street, and I'd often going into a cold sweat at the prospect of buying a loaf of bread and some milk, because the shops were like they were old style shops that by the time we'd left, they'd been big new shopping centres were being built. And so you would have supermarkets like Woolworths and Coles. You just walk in anonymously, don't say anything, just pick up the product you want, scan it, look at the number, hand over the right amount of money. Don't say a word. But where we were, close to where we were, was a corner shop, and every product was behind a counter. And in front of a very grumpy babushka. And people are bustling to buy stuff, and you've got to go in there and you've got to face up to that.
You've got to be quick. And
you got to be who's next, because there's no clear line. It's whoever's next, and you're usually greeted with what. Like that's like not how can I help you today, sir?
What would you like?
It's just what. What? And so I'm there with my rehearsed, I'd like a loaf of bread. and then it's like, so out it comes, I'd like a loaf of bread. And then she rolls her eyes and just says, well, of course you want a loaf of bread, but what kind?
No.
And so right behind her is a wall of various types of bread, dark bread, light breads, seed breads, like different shapes and sizes. And I'm thinking, I haven't done all the adjectives yet. So that one. What do you mean that one? And by this stage, I can feel the eyes burning into me, because now I can say, because we looked Anglo for the most part. If we didn't say anything, no one even asked a question. You could be Russian at all, but now people know that's a foreigner. And I'm not, and I'm just thinking there's not that many foreigners around, perhaps, or maybe not obviously a foreigner, and so maybe people have didn't care at all. But I'm now shrinking, like I'm going, oh no, I want to die, or there's a hole, I want to jump into a hole, and so that painful process, you do that, you'd eventually get the bread. It may not even be the one you want, but it doesn't matter. No,
I'm out of here.
I'm out of here. Well, actually, no. Now I've got to get the milk. Now I've got to get some cheese. Now I've got to do something. And so that, and then I think I was coming home from the shop feeling a bit down, and this little kid runs up to me and just starts going blah 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 blah, and I'm just thinking, great. Now I don't know what this kid's talking about, and I'm thinking this is crazy. I've got 2 degrees. I'm quite capable person, but now I'm totally incapable. And so I guess it was just a really powerful lesson to learn, to sort of think, I'm not all capable. And so in some ways it taught us to really rely on God, to trust Him, to realise our identity is found in Him, not in my abilities. Again, I can say this all now because in hindsight, if I reflect upon it, at that moment I was just really sad and depressed about it. It was a hard there was hard moments like that while we're there. But I wouldn't, if I had chance to go back and change anything, I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah.
It was still very, very helpful and powerful.
Can you tell us about the time you got pulled over by the KGB?
Well, Stu keeps saying that. It wasn't me.
It was just the police.
We had been questioned by the KGB once. The first time we went there, actually, I wasn't a student. We went over to visit first to see some people, and we went there. And the visa that we used, I think, was a dodgy visa. It was a sort of a visa process that had been put together by some other missionaries over there, a non-government organisation, and so we had this visa, and so I think it obviously must have flashed a light somewhere back at headquarters. So when we arrived at the airport, a guy came alongside us and said, "Can you come over to the side room?" And then basically asked us a whole bunch of questions. Where were we going? Who were we going to see? Was this indeed the address that we were going to go to? We were totally oblivious, I think, really at that point in time, just thinking, I don't know why we're getting asked all these questions. We were on the plane with another Australian family who had come in on the student visa, and nothing said to them. They just went straight through. But I think we also looked pretty harmless, because it was just a young couple, and Ebony, our daughter, was 6 months old. So basically we were there with a tiny baby.
Yeah.
So we're not going to be doing anything too nefarious, I guess, because with a small baby. And so that was the time we were formally chatted to by KGB. I had lots of run-ins with police, particularly traffic police, driving cars, because they would just pull over cars randomly, and also it wasn't so clear what a lot of the road rules were, because one, the other drivers weren't demonstrating very well at all, and also a lot of the signage was missing and not there, and so you'd be driving along and think, oh, I can turn left here because everyone else is turning left here, so away you go around the corner, and then there's police sitting there in the corner pulling everyone over. Because you were able to do that a week ago, but not this week. So I had.
They were just looking for bribes, right?
Most of the time, you'd get pulled over. Once they realise you're a foreigner, they think they've caught the big fish, so let's reel him in. So once I remember, I just thought they were going, "Oh yeah, you can pay cash now and go," and I'm going, "All right, I'll pay cash now and go." So but then afterwards had this conscience. I just went, I just think I've just paid them a bribe. So even though, okay, technically I may not have been able to do that, they've just taken a bribe. But from that point on, I said, right, I'm never going to do that. I'll get them to write the fine. But writing the fine was complicated because I was using my Australian licence with a translation, which we were assured by all the people we spoke to that was okay. But of course, it doesn't fit with their paperwork, to fill in details. Yeah. So it was too complicated, and so of course let's just work to see if this guy will just dump us a bit of cash. And so usually it was a long process of are you going to pay the fine? No, you write the fine. I'll pay the fine. When you write the fine, I'll go to the office and pay it. And then it'd become a Mexican standoff usually. Yeah. I didn't ever feel in danger because we were a foreigner. There wasn't many foreigners in town. Yeah. And they were particularly worried about who you might have known. And so I guess the thing was, let's push and pull for a little while, see if he's going to give in and are we going to get some easy money. But if they fight too much, then they might be thinking, well, who do you know? And actually, through various connections and social connections, we did know some fairly high-powered people. So not that I ever wheeled that out. I think that would be one thing that maybe the locals might wheel out. You don't know who I know and that sort of stuff. But I think they would have thought, well, who knows? Like, what? Yeah. And an Australian basketball player used to play for the local team, and he got pulled up, and he didn't know any Russian. And they thought, now they've got a real live one. They were after like $500 from him. So when he saw them, they wrote 500 in the snow on his bonnet of the car, and he's thinking 500. He thought 500 rubles, which amounts to like $20. He's going, oh, 500 rubles. Okay, here you go. And they go, no, $500. And he just went, okay, you can keep the car. I'm walking home. I mean, he couldn't speak this in Russian, but then he said one word they did understand. He said, the car belongs to this name, this guy who owned the basketball team, who was basically one of the biggest bankers in the city. So, of course, they went, sorry, sir, back in your car and away you go.
Off you go.
So you're going to muck around with my players that he's spent all this money to get them to the country, and you harass them, then you can imagine the sort of comeuppance that they would have got.
Yeah.
Did you spend 6 years in Russia?
Yeah, it was probably ended up being more like 7 years there in total, in and out of the country for a 10-year period, from basically 2001 to 2010. So we had various periods back here in Australia and then going back and forth.
Okay.
So over that period of time, we did have some very great connections and clear and wonderful opportunities to minister to people.
And what brought you back permanently to Australia?
Probably a bunch of things. Like, you know, it's not like it wasn't easy living there. So one of the struggles was particularly with the kids and their schooling. That was actually getting trickier and trickier. So I can still remember thinking for Ebony, it was like a weight had lifted off her shoulders when she was able to come back and just be part of schools here. So that helped a lot. Plus, it was tricky being there. We probably needed a lot more pastoral care and support, I guess, while we were there. Not to sort of badmouth their organisation, I think they did a great job, but we were also very, very far away. And so, there was probably limitations even in my ability to keep being there. The pressures on Lyndall and her health as well. So there's a bunch of things that we just thought they had become a bit untenable. So there's probably a few things that we could have probably carried, but once we lined up a couple of things, they just became too much. And I personally really, really wanted to go back because I felt that I was just about to get over the hump when it came to language and certainly opportunities. I had lots of opportunities. I was getting pretty much an open door to go to almost any university, to talk to students, just to get to know them. Just being an Australian, speaking English, that was all total novelties. They loved us. They loved us because the Americans, they'd get flack sometimes from some people, but Australians, they didn't have a clue who we were. They just thought we were just novelties, exotic.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, I was really wanting to go back and be part of that, but it was tricky.
Yeah, right. And then so you came back in 2010. So what happens in that period of time up until the present? Do you get to go back into ministry?
Yeah. So again, we had an opportunity to do ministry when we first came back in Arncliffe. Just up the road. Yeah. So we lived in that area, and our kids went to local schools, and we're involved in a ministry there at Arncliffe for a couple of years. There for about 4 years. Then I went back to the Church Missionary Society, worked there for a while, another 3 or 4 years, involved in training and recruiting, that sort of thing, which was fun. Then after that, I worked for a couple of years with my parents because their business, they were getting quite elderly, and there was a possibility that would we be able to maybe run that business on the side of doing some ministry as well and help that fund the ministry. But that became clear that was not going to work like that. So really it was time for them to sell up and move on, way past retirement age. And so that's what happened. And then again, kindness of God and provision, I was able to come here to Solis for the last 2 years and do ministry here. So that's sort of what happened, plotted pathway, at least for me, when from 2010.
I thought it'd be it's just an idea I've had in the last couple of episodes. Just to wrap it up, I think would be if you look over the history of your time. That's not the right saying. Your personal history. What would be a time that you wish you could go back and give yourself some advice, and what that advice would be?
Good question. Wish I had a bit more time to reflect upon it.
First thing that comes to your mind. It doesn't have to be definitive.
I think I would have loved to have in the early days of being in Russia.
Yeah.
And even in preparation for that, to actually go back and say, you know what, remember that your identity is actually in just who you are before Jesus. That I think I did get caught up a little bit in the identity of being a missionary. Not the celebrity that surrounds it, but just that, okay, this is my role. This is a really, really important role.
Yep.
Lovely support and key support from lots and lots of people. We had lots of friends supporting us, and so alongside of that, I think, oh, then this is really important. I don't want to let these guys down. To not allow my worldly attitudes flow in at that point and think, okay, it must be really important. This is what I'll do, rather than to think, what's God doing and what's God doing in your life, and make sure that you're sort of not letting go of that or allowing these other things to be done pressure you or sort of push you off kilter. Make sure you love your wife and your kids and that sort of thing, which we were doing. It wasn't like I'd become this crazy monster or anything, but that would be I think a really important
just
time.
Kind of saying like where your focus was, just a little bit off center.
Well, just more that's. Yeah, it's that sort of thing that actually helps you to, I think, center yourself on your identity with Christ. And so when things are hard, like when you're in a hard place, to know that it's not, okay, well, what could, I've got to do this better. And then when you're just hitting your head against a brick wall, and you're not going to get very far before you're going to just hurt yourself. So basically, cope with the fact that it's okay. You may not become super fluent. You may not be able to preach in another language, but that's okay. You're here to be Christ's ambassador, and we saw it towards the end. What the biggest influence that we had on other Christians there was just being there as Christians, not so much what I taught them or what I said. They could just see it in our life, and the fact that we had been willing to travel there, to leave a more comfortable life for the sake of the gospel. That's what was powerful for them.
Yeah.
And so to have that sort of word coming in might have actually set me on a better trajectory with that ministry at that time.
Yep.
Yeah. So
that's cool.
I think that would have been a good thing to hear.
I feel like from what I've heard from you, identity is kind of it's an important thing. Like you've taken on a lot of different supposed identities that you're at school, you weren't really Christian, but you were, and then you went to university, and that was a different thing, and then you're a missionary and a quasi-Russian and all that kind of stuff. But then I think it's really important that it seems like you've had those reminders of making sure that we've talked about on the Shock Absorber podcast about Miroslav Volf, who talks about we all have multiple identities, but the most important one, and the one that influences all of those, is we're a Christian first. We're Jesus is our identity first. So that's something I've learned from you today, is to keep knowing that. That's what I think you're saying too. It's really important, and it helps you to rise, because it was quite a bit of an existential crisis to have to come back earlier than what we wanted to. And so it's like, well, then what was that all about? And actually understand, well, it's okay. God's still ruling. He's still in control, So that sort of lesson, is important to learn. Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Paul.
Yeah,
I think it might be time to wrap up the chips.
probably.
What do you think? Probably.
Wrap up those chips.
Wrap up the chips
They're
that
cold, they're cold by now.
Yeah, that's right. But thank you so much for your contribution to the Chip Lunch podcast. It was.
It's a pleasure to be here.
No,
Thanks for inviting me.
I love hearing everyone's stories, so it's
Yeah.
really cool. So thank you very much.
Mm.
For that. Thank you, Braden, for
Problem.
joining us. And we always finish up on the Chip Lunch podcast with a one way. Should we do it together?
Right.
One way.